Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to edit a photo to give it a painted look. So I think that the painted look is a really sought after effect when it comes to editing photography. And it's particularly good for woodland or landscape photography. And so I thought I'd run through today how I approach giving the painted effect to my photography. But it's important to note that we're not creating an outright painted effect. So I think there are lots of apps and AI tools out there that will give you that effect. What we're doing is a little bit more subtle. We're just going to be inspired by painters. And there are lots of different types of painters and paintings, lots of different genres. But I think the one that springs to mind for me is probably the romantic landscape painters such as Constable. And maybe veering into Impressionism, that kind of thing. Anything that gives it that soft, dreamy, ethereal look. Like I said, that's so good for woodland or landscape photography. So I've got an image behind me on screen and we're going to dive in now and look at how I edit that to give it that painted look. Okay, so this is the image we're going to work on. I captured this last autumn in a local woodland area, and you can apply this painted processing technique to any image really, but I find it works particularly well for woodland photography. Gives it that really kind of soft, romantic look. So yeah, we're going to work on this one. And what I'm going to do is just come into basic to start with, and we'll start adjusting the basic tone. I usually always start with auto just to get some quick edits in there, move those sliders and give me a base to work from. So from here I'm just going to probably bring down the exposure a bit. It's just a little bit too bright at the minute. I might come back to contrast, bring highlights all the way down. Whites, I'm going to bring those down because it's just too bright. To about there. Blacks, I'll bring those up a bit. Might have to come back to those, but for now that's okay. And we will bring up the contrast. I think emphasising the dark and light areas in an image is a good way to create that painted look. I mean, obviously it depends on the style of painting. Some paintings are obviously more contrasty than others, but I'm going to go for that contrasty look. Like I said, I think it's a good way to give it that painted look, or help bring it on the way to looking painted. So that's not looking too bad at the moment. It's maybe just a little bit oversaturated, so we'll just bring down the vibrance a little bit and the saturation, quite a lot on that I think, to about there. And I think the temperature's alright. Yeah, it was probably alright about there, it's fine. Tint again, that's fine. So what we're going to do next is come down to detail, and we're going to look at denoise. So it was quite early in the morning when I captured this shot, fairly dark, and even though I was on a tripod, there was a little bit of movement in the leaves on the trees, so I did bump my ISO up to ISO 640. And so we can do a bit of noise reduction in this, that's nice. But it's also got a double benefit, because we want to create this painted look, and a lot of that is going to revolve around reducing the image quality and clarity basically. So normally when we're using denoise, it's a bit of a compromise because you can get rid of some of that noise, but then you reduce sharpening and detail as well. But because we want to get rid of sharpening and detail, it's basically, you know, free. You get a free denoise without any compromises. But don't use the AI denoise because that will apply some sharpening. Instead, use the good old luminance slider, and I'm going to bring that up fairly high to about there. You see that's really got rid of a lot of noise, but also the sharpening, we can turn that on and off. That was before and that's now. We can leave colour where it is, doesn't really matter too much about that. I think that's applied by default, at least with my settings in Lightroom. It does apply a little bit of colour denoise. And the same with sharpening, it's applied that to a level of 40, but I'm going to reduce it all the way down to 0. And you see up close that's really kind of soft now. If we just zoom out, that's looking nice and ethereal, nice and soft and romantic looking. we can further control that clarity with the presence sliders up here under basic, and there are basically three ways you can use these two sliders. One is to boost the clarity and reduce the texture. So clarity is kind of like the larger areas in the image, and it's going to increase the clarity or presence of those areas, the larger kind of bulk areas, whereas texture is going to apply the same effects to the smaller areas like edges and things like that. So you see what effect that's created. You can also go the other way, bring clarity down and texture up, and you get that kind of look. I mean, that does have a kind of, it's almost like an outlined look to it. So if you're going for that style, that's fine. It's not my particular favourite, so I prefer to come down with the texture. And the third way is to also come down with the clarity, so you can either, I wouldn't recommend going up with clarity and texture, but to come down with both is also an option. But I'm going to come down with texture more than clarity, so we're going to come to about -10 with clarity and about -20 with texture. And that's starting to look a little bit how I want it now. You can also use the dehaze slider. That's going to add more contrast and a bit of saturation. It's going to get rid of a little bit of that foggy effect, so I don't want to add too much. And you may also want to adjust the vibrance and saturation sliders a little bit more if you've used dehaze, particularly if you've used a lot of dehaze, because it will, like I said, add that saturation. Next, we're going to use the colour mixer. So this is to really kind of localise some of the edits, mainly around luminance and saturation for particular colours. So for example, we can really bring up the brightness of the leaves by bringing up the green and yellow luminance sliders. Like that. We can bring down the blue just to kind of really emphasise the fact that the yellows and greens have been brought up, because the blue is surrounding those colours. And I think the ground here with the oranges and yellows is looking a little bit wishy-washy, so I might just bring down the luminance on the orange just so it's not as bright, and same with the red to about there. And I may come back to these, but that's okay for now. Saturation, what I want to do is have more emphasis on the greens and yellows, so I'm going to bring down the saturation on the orange to about there. The yellow, I'll bring that down a bit, but not as much because there's still some yellows in the leaves and I don't want to bring that down too much. Maybe come down a little bit with the greens, but yeah, nowhere near as much because that's one of the main colours I want to emphasise. We can bring the blue down a bit, it's maybe a little bit too blue in the background. Purple, yeah, we'll bring that just down a touch. And that magenta as well. Okay, I'm not going to play with hue much, I don't think. Maybe the blue a touch. I think that's looking okay now. I am going to make some changes to the colours though, but I'm going to do that with colour grading, so we'll drop that down. Because I think painters, and to some extent photographers, particularly when editing, try to create a mood or a vibe in the image, because perhaps their camera didn't record that at the time, but they experienced these colours, or the way they felt, they just felt that there were different colours in the image. And painters can do that much more easily because they've got much more control over what they put onto the canvas. So by using the colour grading and the colour mixer, you can kind of bring some of that into your image and control it how you see fit. So I want a fairly realistic painted look, but I mean you could go crazy and get some really funky effects if you want that abstract painted look. But I'm going to keep it fairly realistic, and what I'm going to do is just adjust this top thing here Thing is a technical term. This is the colour wheel for the highlights. So what we can do is bring this circle around to the colour we want, and then we can bring this one from the middle up towards the outer edge to apply more or less saturation of that colour. So I'm going to bring to about there, and you see it emphasises all the highlights, makes them more yellow. If I was to bring that around to the pinks or reds, you can see what that does. But I like it around about there. Maybe a little bit more golden. And then we can do that with the shadows. So I'll just bring that up and then bring this one round, and we'll make it a little bit more, maybe a little bit more purple in the shadow areas, but not too much, just subtly. And then you've got the kind of mid-tones. So let's have a look what looks good for that. Maybe like an orangey colour, something like that. Again, keep it subtle, something like that. And you've got these little sliders for each where you can just play around with how much you're applying of each of those. So just playing around with these until you create a look that you like, really. And you've got overall blending here, so how much it blends with your original image, and the balance between the various midtones, shadows and highlights. I should say as well actually that top one isn't highlights, that is midtones. I incorrectly said highlights before, but the bottom right one is highlights, the top one is midtones. Okay, so that's my colour grading done. So all I'm really going to do on this now is a whole load of selective edits. So that's coming up to here and the top right, and then I can add any of the different masks from the list. So I'll probably add a little bit of sharpening back into this, particularly on the tree stump on the right. I'll just do that with the brush. So we'll just paint over the tree stump here. I'm going very quickly here. I would normally spend a bit more time on this. That's roughly going to do it. And what I will do as well is, because I want the foreground to be slightly sharper as well, so I'm going to add to that mask a linear gradient and just bring that up from the bottom. And now we can come down to the presence sliders and just bring up a little bit of the clarity and texture. So just to add a little bit of that back, and maybe bring up the shadows slightly as well. Not a lot, just a touch. Okay, I think this area down here is a little bit dark, so I'll probably use a radial gradient there. Just draw that out, bring up the shadows a bit. Maybe even the exposure. And I really want this background area to be a bit brighter, so I'm going to bring a radial gradient over here like this. And just really bring up those highlights, maybe the whites, exposure maybe. And what I can also do, which will probably give me a little bit more control, is use the colour range mask, and then I can just select somewhere on the background, such as here, and that will select that colour range. I'll probably just need to refine that, so I'll bring down this slider up here, the refine slider. You see it's just selecting the background there now, mostly. And what we can do then is bring up the exposure, or the whites, highlights, things like that. And what I can also do is just subtract a radial gradient from this up the top here, because I don't want that mask to affect any of the area at the top here with the light coming down. So that's okay for that one. And finally, what I'm going to do, and this is quite an important step to make it that kind of painted style, I'm going to create a new mask, and this is going to be with a brush, and we're just basically going to do some dodging and burning. So we can just paint in the areas where we want to emphasize brighter areas. So we just need to look for areas that are already brighter and paint over them basically. And I'm not going to do all of this because it's going to take quite a long time, but you just kind of paint over all these areas that are bright. And you can do the opposite with dark areas. But once you've got all of your areas highlighted, then you can adjust your exposure or highlights. You just need to play around with these, whites, anything that will kind of increase the brightness. I like to add a little bit of warmth as well into those areas with the temperature slider. And yeah, just go around your image, emphasizing those highlights. So along the branch here, you can zoom in if you need to. And like I said, I'm not going to do the whole thing here, that'd take a long time, but instead I'll put the final image up on screen now and you can see how that's come out. So that's how I give my photography a soft painted look. And it's important to note that what we're really doing here is reducing the quality and clarity of an image, and they're often things that we associate with good photography. So it can be hard to let go of that. But if you do just give up a little bit and really run with it, just soften it, get rid of that clarity, get rid of that detail and sharpness, you can really learn to love and embrace that soft, ethereal effect that gives it that really painted-like quality. But that's it for this video, so a huge thank you for watching. If you found it useful or you've liked it in any way, please just give me a thumbs up down below. That really helps out, it gets the video shared more widely, and then hopefully if people are finding this useful, more of those people can find it. If you're a regular viewer and you tune in each and every week, massive thank you to you, I really do appreciate it. But if you're not and you'd like to be a regular, you can just subscribe down there by clicking the big red button, or over here on this little picture of me, and that way you'll stay up to date with everything I'm doing. There are new videos Sunday mornings at 10 AM UK time. So I hope you can join me for the next one, but until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.